The sky had never looked so terrifying. One moment it was a flawless blue, the kind that made you squint and feel like you were staring directly into infinity. The next it was a chaos of clouds, black and roiling, shaking violently under the storm that had sprung from nowhere. Marco had been sitting by the window of the small charter plane, gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He had been a bright-eyed intern at Preston Industries for barely 6 months, still trying to make sense of corporate hierarchies, the tiny office politics, and the occasional unreasonable demand from the higher-ups. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. The idea that a routine flight, a simple journey to a company retreat, could end with him crashing into the unknown. He looked to his left, and there she was, the reason he'd spent countless sleepless nights wondering what it would be like to be closer to someone out of reach. Olivia Preston, his boss's wife, sat rigidly in the seat next to him. The brunette hair framed her face like silk, though now it was tousled and streaked with dust. Her green eyes were wide with the same terror that mirrored his own. She was 44, undeniably sophisticated, and utterly intimidating in the boardroom, where Marco had often imagined her presence as both lethal and magnetic. Yet now, trapped beside her with gravity failing them in ways they couldn't control, she looked human. Vulnerable. The turbulence reached a crescendo, shaking the plane like a toy in a child's grip. Marco could hear the groan of metal protesting under the strain, the sudden whistle of wind piercing the cabin. Panic clawed at his throat. The last thing he remembered before the world turned into fire and chaos was Olivia's hand brushing against his as they both instinctively reached for the seatbelt. Then everything went black. When Marco came to, his head throbbed and the sun was blinding. He coughed violently, spluttering sand and seawater. The plane was gone, reduced to scattered debris along a crescent of pristine beach. The roar of the ocean filled his ears, the heat of the tropical sun beating down on his neck. He blinked, disoriented, and turned his head. "Marco!" The voice was hoarse but distinctly hers. Olivia was sitting a few feet away, coughing herself, her clothes torn and smeared with sand. She waved weakly. He scrambled toward her, ignoring the pain that shot down his arms and legs. "You're alive," he gasped. Relief flooded him, almost paralyzing in its intensity. Yes," she said, brushing sand from her hair, her voice trembling. "I think we're alive." The realization hit them both like a thunderclap. They had survived the crash. But they were stranded. Completely alone. And the island looked untouched by civilization, a lush paradise that suddenly seemed more like a prison. Marco helped her to her feet, wincing as his ankle protested. "We need to find shelter, water, food," he muttered, instinctively shifting into survival mode. Despite his youth and inexperience, something in him kicked in, a combination of fear, adrenaline, and a latent sense of responsibility. Olivia frowned at him. "And you think you can handle that? You're an intern." Marco gave a half-smile, though his heart pounded. "Well, I can try. Can you walk?" "I can," she said, a little stiffly, though she leaned on him more than she probably should have. "But don't get any ideas. I'm not here to play damsel in distress." He laughed softly, a nervous sound that seemed to ease some of the tension. The irony wasn't lost on him. Months ago, he had spent hours daydreaming about her in impossible scenarios. Now here she was, not just real, but stranded beside him, every bit as magnetic in her frailty as she had been in her power. They walked along the shoreline, picking their way over jagged debris and half-submerged pieces of the plane. The water sparkled like glass in the afternoon sun, the waves gentle here and there, but every step reminded them of the fragility of their situation. After a while, they found a small grove of palms, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Marco collapsed against a tree, trying to calm the tremors in his body. "We should set up a temporary shelter," he said. "Anything to get out of the sun." Olivia nodded, scanning the area. "There's driftwood. Maybe we can." She stopped, staring at him with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. "You know, I never thought I'd be stuck here with you," she said, almost in a whisper. Mako swallowed hard. His mind raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Well, luck works in mysterious ways." She gave a half-smile, then sighed and began gathering wood. He watched her move, every graceful motion an unsettling reminder of how different she seemed outside the context of her world, the high society dinners, the glances at boardroom tables. Here, she was just a woman struggling to survive. And yet, it was intoxicating. Hours passed. They managed to construct a small lean-to with palm fronds and driftwood. Marco found some coconuts and attempted, with mixed success, to open them. Olivia helped, laughter spilling from her lips despite the circumstances, a sound that made Marco's heart lurch in ways he couldn't fully understand. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting gold across the sand, they sat beside the shelter, exhausted and silent. The sky blazed in colors that seemed almost unreal. "Marco," Olivia said quietly, breaking the silence, Do you ever think about how fragile life is?" He nodded, staring at the horizon. "Every day. I think about it now more than ever." She turned to look at him. "I never imagined surviving something like this would feel this intense." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them. The distant crash of waves, the rustling palms, even the debris of the plane, all irrelevant. Marco's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her so many things, how he had admired her from afar, how he had imagined this moment countless times, even in less dramatic circumstances. But words felt impossibly heavy. Instead, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and crimson. Night fell, and with it the realization that they were truly alone. There would be no rescue tonight, perhaps not for days. Marco and Olivia huddled together under their fragile shelter, sharing warmth. It was uncomfortable, terrifying, and yet comforting in a way neither wanted to admit. He could feel her breath against his neck, smell the faint scent of her hair, a mix of perfume and coconut oil, now mingled with the raw reality of survival. "Marco!" He turned slightly, catching her gaze. "If we make it, if we survive, what happens then?" Her voice was soft, uncertain, vulnerable. He swallowed, unsure if he was ready for the answer himself. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But right now, we just have to survive. Together." Her hand squeezed his. Just like that, amidst the uncertainty and fear, a fragile connection formed. Not of convenience, not of duty, but of something deeper, something instinctive. The stars began to peek out from the darkening sky, twinkling like distant promises. Marco felt the strange mix of terror and exhilaration, the knowledge that life had changed forever in a single moment. And as the waves lapped gently against the shore, he realized something he hadn't anticipated. Being stranded here with Olivia Preston might be the most terrifying and most thrilling experience of his life. The first night on the island was restless. Marco lay awake, listening to the distant cry of the waves and the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. The heat of the day had given way to a slightly cooler night, but the dampness of the sand and the tension of survival made sleep elusive. Olivia was beside him, curled up as best she could under the flimsy shelter they'd constructed. She stirred occasionally, a low sigh escaping her lips, and Marco found himself staring at her, torn between guilt and curiosity. He shook his head, trying to clear the feelings. This was a survival situation. There was no room for fantasies or awkward emotions. And yet the proximity was impossible to ignore. The warmth of her body, the softness of her hair brushing against his arm, the faint, lingering scent of her perfume despite the sweat and sand. By dawn, they were both awake, groggy but driven by necessity. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the beach. Marco rubbed his eyes and muttered, "We need to find fresh water and food. Coconuts are fine, but it won't sustain us for long." Olivia nodded, stretching and grimacing at a twinge in her back. "Lead the way, Mr. Intern," she said dryly, attempting a humor that fell flat in the face of exhaustion. Marco smiled despite himself. The familiarity of her sarcasm felt like a fragile bridge to the world they had lost. They ventured inland, Marco keeping an eye out for signs of wildlife or natural water sources. The island was lush, dense with vegetation and exotic flowers. Birds of brilliant colors flitted through the trees, and insects buzzed around their heads. The beauty of it should have been reassuring, but it felt oppressive in its isolation. After a couple of hours of walking, they stumbled upon a small stream trickling through the foliage. Marco knelt beside it, cupping water in his hands to drink. "We're lucky," he said. "This should keep us hydrated for now." Olivia bent down to drink, her hands brushing his. A spark of electricity ran through him at the contact, and he cleared his throat, trying to ignore it. She met his gaze briefly, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Lucky," she repeated, as if savoring the word. They spent the day exploring the immediate area, marking landmarks in the sand and collecting driftwood and large leaves for shelter improvements. The island was small enough that they could map it quickly, but the thought of being stranded for weeks, or longer, loomed over them like a shadow. As the sun climbed high, Marco found a spot where they could rest in the shade. Olivia flopped down on a patch of soft grass, wiping sweat from her brow. "You know, I never thought I'd be lying on a deserted island with my husband's intern," she said, shaking her head. "This is absurd." Marco chuckled, brushing sand off his shirt. "Life tends to throw absurd situations at us. Guess we just have to make the best of it." She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're awfully calm about this." "I've had some experience in panic," he admitted. "It's not very productive. Better to focus on survival and, planning." Her laugh was soft, almost musical, and it made something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with survival instincts. She leaned back, letting the sun warm her face, and Marco found himself watching every subtle expression, the curve of her lips, the line of her jaw, the way her hair fell over her shoulder. Hours passed, and as evening approached, they returned to their shelter, exhausted but somewhat satisfied with their progress. The lean-to had been reinforced, and they had managed to create a rudimentary fire pit using stones and driftwood. Marco struck flint repeatedly until a spark caught, igniting a small flame. The warmth was a welcome comfort against the cool evening air, and the crackling of the fire seemed almost domesticated in the wild landscape. Olivia sat close, tending to the fire with delicate hands, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "We need to keep it going through the night," she said, a hint of concern in her voice. "It keeps wild animals away and keeps us warm." Marco nodded. "I'll take first watch," he said, though the thought of being alone while she slept made his chest tighten. She looked at him, her gaze holding something he couldn't quite name. "Marco, if we survive this, do you think—" "I mean—" Her voice faltered, and she looked away, the words hanging in the air like fragile glass. He took a deep breath, unsure how to respond. "I don't know what the future holds," he said honestly. "But right now, I'm just glad you're alive. That's enough." She smiled faintly, leaning back against him as they watched the flames dance. The firelight flickered across her features, softening the sharp elegance of her usual corporate poise into something achingly human. Marco felt an unexpected heat rise in his chest, a mixture of desire, admiration, and the raw emotional intensity of their shared ordeal. Night deepened. The sounds of the island changed. The gentle lap of waves, the distant call of nocturnal creatures, the wind whispering through the palms. Marco kept his eyes on the shadows, vigilant, while Olivia finally drifted into a fitful sleep beside him. The warmth of her body pressed against his side, and he fought the impulse to move closer, to hold her, to make some silent claim to the only thing that felt certain in the chaos surrounding them. Hours later, Marco's first watch ended. He had sat in silence, listening to the island breathe, contemplating the strange, growing tension between them. He had always respected boundaries, understood hierarchy, and never crossed lines he shouldn't. But here, under the raw exposure of nature, lines blurred. Vulnerability was intimate, and intimacy was unavoidable. By dawn, both were awake, groggy but alive. Olivia stretched, wincing slightly, then turned to him. "We need to find food beyond coconuts," she said, her voice firm. "We can't rely on what washes up." Marco agreed, and together they ventured further inland, improvising traps for small game and foraging for edible plants. They discovered a small grove of fruit trees, their branches heavy with mangoes and guavas. The excitement of a successful find brought a moment of levity. They laughed, teased each other, and even argued over whose turn it was to carry the heavier load. By the third day, their routine was forming: gather water, find food, reinforce shelter, and maintain the fire. And yet, despite the practicality of survival, there was an unspoken current between them. Glances lingered too long, touches felt electric, and conversations drifted into confessions, small, tentative, but revealing. One evening, while they sat side by side, sharing the meager feast of fruit and roasted fish they had caught, Olivia's hand brushed against Marco's. He didn't pull away. She didn't either. They exchanged a look, a mixture of curiosity, longing, and something neither dared name. The fire crackled between them, a silent witness to the growing tension, the delicate dance of desire and restraint. Neither spoke, yet both felt the shift. The island, the crash, the isolation, it had changed everything. Marco realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that he was falling for her. Olivia, perhaps unknowingly, was doing the same. And somewhere deep in the darkness, surrounded by the wild heartbeat of the island, they both knew that the next few days would be a test, not just of survival, but of the heart. By the fourth day, the novelty of the island had worn off. The initial adrenaline had given way to a simmering exhaustion. Every movement seemed heavier, every task more laborious, yet there was a strange rhythm to their survival. Marco and Olivia moved together like an unspoken team, anticipating each other's needs without words. They woke early, as usual, to the soft golden light of dawn. Marco had learned to make a fire in mere minutes, while Olivia had discovered an uncanny talent for spotting edible plants and fruits hidden among the dense foliage. She carried herself with a natural grace, even in the most exhausting circumstances, and Marco found himself drawn to it more than he wanted to admit. "Marco," she said as they walked along the beach, balancing a basket of fruit between them, "do you ever think about what's waiting for us if we get rescued?" He glanced at her, noting the furrow in her brow, the way her lips pressed together. "I try not to," he admitted. "I'm too focused on staying alive." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. That's what matters most, now." They had grown silent for a while, walking side by side. The air between them was thick, not just with humidity, but with something unspoken. Marco felt it, the small glances, the brush of her hand against his, the way her laughter lingered a beat too long whenever he made a joke. He wanted to deny the feelings stirring in him, wanted to focus on survival alone, but the truth was impossible to ignore. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a small clearing near a freshwater pool. Marco knelt beside it, cupping water and bringing it to his lips. Olivia followed, kneeling beside him, her fingers brushing his accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, against the rippling water. "Careful," Marco said, his voice low, almost a whisper. His heart raced as he met her gaze. Olivia's eyes held his, steady and unflinching. "Careful of what?" she asked softly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Marco didn't answer immediately. He only noticed the way the sunlight caught the highlights in her hair, the soft curve of her neck, the subtle scent of her skin, wild and real under the strain of survival. His hands itched to reach out, but he held them in his lap, reminding himself of the boundary he should never cross. "You've changed since the crash," Olivia said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You're braver, more focused." Marco's throat tightened. "I had a good teacher," he said quietly, glancing at her. She tilted her head, an eyebrow raised. "Me?" He smiled, a small, uncertain thing. You've taught me more than you know. How to stay calm, how to think clearly under pressure. And, well, surviving with you here, it changes how I see things." Olivia studied him for a long moment, the fire of the sun reflecting in her green eyes. Then she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "Marco, you're 23. I'm 44. This is insane. We can't—" He interrupted gently. "I know." Yet the words hung in the air like a delicate tension. Neither spoke for a while, each lost in thought. The island seemed to hold its breath around them, the distant call of birds and the soft lap of water the only sounds breaking the stillness. That evening, as they returned to the shelter, the air was cooler. They had gathered enough fruit and small fish to last another day, and for the first time there was a sense of small accomplishment, a fleeting victory against the relentless challenge of the island. Marco stoked the fire while Olivia prepared the meal, her movements precise, efficient, yet filled with an ease that Marco envied. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat close to the fire. The glow highlighted the contours of her face, softened the sharp elegance that usually defined her, and revealed the vulnerability beneath. Marco felt a heat rise in his chest, a combination of admiration and something he had no words for yet. Olivia broke the silence. "Do you think anyone knows we're alive?" Marco shook his head slowly. "I doubt it. The crash was sudden. No one could have predicted that we'd end up here," she finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Yes, exactly." They ate in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the fire crackling softly between them. Marco noticed the way Olivia's hand brushed against his every so often, the subtle tension in her posture, and the warmth that seemed to radiate from her mere presence. He felt a stirring in him, a dangerous and thrilling awareness of desire that both exhilarated and terrified him. As night fell, the temperature dropped slightly. They huddled under the lean-to, sharing warmth. Marco could feel Olivia's breath against his shoulder, could hear the faint rhythm of her heartbeat. The proximity was intoxicating, yet they remained cautious, each aware of the delicate boundary between survival necessity and emotional temptation. "Marco," Olivia whispered after a while, her voice trembling slightly, "do you ever think about what we'd do if no one came?" He swallowed, his pulse quickening. I try not to think about it. But if we had to, we'd survive. Together." She turned toward him, her face close, eyes searching his. "Together," she repeated, her voice a soft echo. The intensity of the moment was almost unbearable. Marco could feel the heat of her body, the softness of her skin against his, and the pull of something forbidden yet undeniable. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but fear of crossing a line held him back. And yet, as their fingers brushed again, lingering this time, the tension snapped. A small spark, fragile and dangerous, ignited between them. It was a subtle shift, a beginning, but it changed everything. The island, the isolation, the constant threat of danger, all of it seemed to vanish for a moment, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection between them. Olivia leaned back slightly, her face flushed, eyes wide. "Marco, this is impossible," she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak, his heart racing. "I know," he admitted. They settled into a tense silence, both aware of the new dynamic, both feeling the pull of something neither dared fully acknowledge. The fire crackled, the night deepened, and for the first time since the crash, the island felt less like a prison and more like a place suspended in time, a place where the world outside no longer existed, leaving only them. And somewhere deep within, Marco realized that the next days would be more than just survival. They would be a test of hearts, desires, and the fragile line between fear and longing. The fifth day dawned humid and heavy, the sun slicing through the canopy in golden shafts that made the island feel alive in a way both beautiful and oppressive. Marco woke first, as usual, listening to the waves crashing against the shore and the distant cawing of seabirds. Olivia was still asleep, curled under the lean-to, her hair falling in a dark cascade over her shoulders. He studied her for a long moment. The events of the past days had transformed her in ways he hadn't expected. In the office, she had been untouchable, distant, a woman wrapped in power and influence. Here, stripped of all that, she was human, vulnerable, yet somehow even more magnetic. His chest tightened, the desire that had simmered since the crash now undeniable. Marco pushed the feelings aside, reminding himself that survival came first. But the sight of her, soft and unguarded, made concentration nearly impossible. He shook his head and focused on gathering fresh water from the stream they had discovered, filling makeshift containers and ensuring that their limited resources were carefully rationed. Olivia awoke as he returned, blinking against the light, stretching in a way that made his pulse quicken. "Morning," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Did you sleep well?" "Enough," he replied, setting down the water. "And you?" She shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "As well as one can on a deserted island with an intern for company." Marco laughed, a little awkwardly. "I'm glad I'm keeping you entertained." She tilted her head at him, her eyes sharp despite the gentle morning light. "You've changed since this started," she observed. "You seem more aware, I suppose." "I guess survival has a way of forcing perspective," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Makes everything else seem less important." Olivia studied him, her gaze lingering in a way that made his heart skip. "Including me?" she asked softly, almost teasingly. He froze, caught between honesty and caution. I don't know what I'm supposed to say," he admitted. "Right now, you're everything that matters." She blinked at him, and for a heartbeat, the island felt suspended. The sound of the waves, the whispering palm fronds, and even the distant cries of birds seemed to fade, leaving only the intensity of the moment. Olivia's lips parted slightly, and Marco felt a pull he could no longer resist. Before he could stop himself, he reached for her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and soft, and a jolt of electricity ran through him. She didn't pull away, only let her gaze linger on his. "Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling. We shouldn't." "I know," he replied, his own voice low. "But I can't help it." Their hands remained clasped, a silent acknowledgment of the forbidden tension building between them. It was dangerous, unthinkable in the normal world, but here, stripped of everything familiar, it felt inevitable. The day passed in a blur of activity and unspoken longing. They foraged for fruits, caught fish using crude traps, and fortified the lean-to with additional palm fronds and driftwood. The physical exertion left them sweaty and exhausted, yet the proximity to each other made every glance, every accidental touch, charged with a quiet electricity. By late afternoon, they returned to the shelter, their haul of food barely sufficient for the night. Marco started the fire while Olivia prepared the fish, her movements precise yet intimate, as if she were aware of his gaze following her. The firelight danced across her features, highlighting the tension in her jaw, the delicate curve of her neck, and the softness of her lips that seemed impossibly close. As night fell, they sat close to the fire, sharing the roasted fish and pieces of mango. The conversation was light at first, forced, almost comical in its attempt to ignore the deeper tension between them. But as the darkness thickened and the sound of the waves grew louder, the levity gave way to a charged silence. "Marco," Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder about the life we left behind?" "All the time," he admitted. "But right now that life seems distant, unreal, like it belonged to someone else." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I feel the same. It's strange, terrifying, and yet somehow freeing." Their hands brushed again, this time intentionally. Marco didn't pull away. Olivia leaned slightly closer, the heat of her body radiating against his side. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the sand and the lean-to, a silent witness to the growing intimacy between them. "Marco," she murmured, her voice trembling, If we do this, it changes everything." "I know," he replied, his hand inching to rest lightly on hers. "But maybe, out here, nothing else matters." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken desire and the thrill of the forbidden. Olivia's eyes softened, a mixture of fear and longing evident in her gaze. She leaned closer, and for a moment their foreheads touched, a delicate and dangerous act that sent shivers down Marco's spine. The fire crackled, the night deepened, and the world outside the lean-to ceased to exist. There was only them, their shared warmth, the electricity between their bodies, and the fragile understanding that what was happening was more than just survival. It was a collision of longing and vulnerability, a connection that defied reason but felt inevitable. Marco's pulse raced as he felt Olivia's breath against his cheek, her warmth pressing against him. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words failed him. Instead, he let the moment stretch, savoring the closeness, the intimacy, the quiet thrill of touching someone forbidden yet achingly present. And Olivia, for her part, didn't pull away. She let the tension linger, her heart racing with the knowledge that the island had become a place where rules no longer applied, where the line between desire and restraint blurred, and where two souls, stranded together, were discovering a connection that neither had anticipated but both were powerless to deny. The night wore on, the stars twinkling above like distant witnesses. Marco and Olivia remained close, hands brushing, shoulders touching, sharing warmth and silent acknowledgments. Each glance, each subtle touch, deepened the tension, and each heartbeat carried the promise of something more, something forbidden, dangerous, and utterly irresistible. In the heart of the deserted island, amidst the wild rhythm of nature and the constant threat of survival, a fragile electric bond was forming, one that neither time nor circumstance could easily sever. The sixth day brought with it a strange rhythm, one of survival interlaced with a growing, undeniable tension between Marco and Olivia. The island seemed to pulse around them, alive and unpredictable. Each morning, they woke to the scent of salt and foliage, the sun breaking over the horizon with a golden intensity that made the world feel both harsh and intoxicating. Marco had begun to notice the subtle shifts in Olivia, the way her laughter had grown more relaxed, the way her eyes lingered on him in fleeting moments, and how her presence seemed to fill the air with a kind of electric warmth. She moved with grace even in the strain of survival, yet there were moments when vulnerability peeked through, the way she winced as she lifted a heavy branch, or the softness in her voice when she spoke about something personal, even trivial. "Marco," she called one morning, her voice carrying through the grove where they had set up their lean-to. "Help me with this." He jogged over, noting how the sunlight caught her hair, highlighting the subtle waves in her brunette locks. She was lifting a particularly large coconut, and he reached out, his hands steadying the fruit. Their fingers brushed again, and this time neither pulled away. "You're getting too close," Olivia said with mock sternness, though the flush in her cheeks betrayed her own awareness of their proximity. "And yet I'm still allowed to help," Marco replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. Her laughter rang out, light and musical, carrying across the clearing. It was the first time in days that either of them had allowed themselves to forget the immediacy of survival, if only for a moment. The day passed in a series of small victories. They found more fruit, discovered a small freshwater spring farther inland, and even managed to fashion a rudimentary fishing spear from bamboo. Every task brought them closer together, the physical proximity and shared effort igniting an unspoken intimacy. By the time evening fell, their hands brushed constantly, and their shared glances held a weight neither could deny. As night descended, they sat beside the fire, the orange glow illuminating their features. The island around them was quiet now, the constant hum of the waves and the rustle of nocturnal creatures forming a soft backdrop to their shared isolation. "Marco," Olivia began, her voice tentative, "do you ever wonder if we're the only ones left?" "All the time," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the fire. "But right now, that doesn't matter as much as staying alive, together." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was no barrier, no hesitation. She leaned slightly closer, the warmth of her body pressing against his side. Marco felt a surge of heat in his chest, the desire that had been simmering since the crash threatening to spill over. "Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. It's wrong." "I know," he replied, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But it doesn't feel wrong here. Not in this moment. Out here, it's just us." Their faces drew closer, breaths mingling, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. The tension that had been building for days reached a precipice, fragile and charged. Marco could feel her heartbeat against his chest, fast and erratic, mirroring his own. Then, as if the island itself had sanctioned it, Olivia tilted her head slightly, and their lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though both were testing the boundaries of this forbidden intimacy. Marco's heart raced, the intensity of the moment overwhelming. He deepened the kiss slowly, carefully, aware of every nuance, the softness of her lips, the warmth of her skin, the scent of her hair mingling with the smoke from the fire. Olivia responded, her arms moving to encircle him, drawing him closer. The world outside ceased to exist, the crash, the office, the life they had known, all irrelevant in the face of this raw, undeniable connection. Their kiss was a promise, an acknowledgment of desire and vulnerability, a surrender to something they both had fought to suppress. They broke apart slightly, foreheads resting together, breath mingling. Olivia's eyes were bright, glistening with unshed tears, and Marco could see the same mixture of fear and longing that mirrored his own. This changes everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "I know," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But maybe, out here, nothing else matters." They sat in silence, hands intertwined, the fire casting flickering shadows across the sand. The intimacy between them was no longer just physical. It was emotional, a shared vulnerability that had grown from the ordeal of survival. Marco realized that he had never felt closer to anyone in his life, and the knowledge that Olivia felt the same sent a thrill through him that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The night stretched on, the stars above twinkling like distant witnesses to their secret. Marco and Olivia remained close, speaking in hushed tones, sharing stories of their lives before the crash, their fears, their regrets, and their dreams. Each revelation deepened the connection, forging a bond that went beyond desire, a bond built on trust, vulnerability, and the shared experience of surviving the impossible. As they finally settled into a fitful sleep, wrapped in the shared warmth of their small shelter, Marco felt a sense of clarity he had not known before. The island, with all its dangers and isolation, had stripped away the superficial layers of life, revealing something raw, real, and undeniable. Olivia stirred in her sleep, pressing closer to him, and Marco responded instinctively, holding her gently. The night was long, but for the first time since the crash, he felt a sense of peace, a fragile, fleeting peace, suspended in the quiet intimacy of two souls brought together by circumstance, desire, and the unyielding will to survive. In the heart of the deserted island, beneath the endless sky, they had discovered something neither had anticipated, a connection that was as dangerous as it was irresistible, as fragile as it was intense. And both knew, deep down, that their journey, both on the island and within each other's hearts, was only beginning. The seventh day dawned with a heavy humidity that made even breathing feel like work. Marco and Olivia had begun to settle into an uneasy rhythm, each task punctuated by an unspoken awareness of the other's presence. The island had begun to feel less like a prison and more like a strange, intoxicating cocoon where the world outside no longer mattered. They woke early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, and set about their daily tasks. Marco gathered water and checked the traps they had set for small fish and crabs, while Olivia foraged for fruit and edible plants deeper into the grove. Despite the exhaustion etched into their faces, there was an ease now, a familiarity born of necessity and shared survival. As Marco returned from checking the traps, he noticed Olivia struggling with a particularly large branch. He dropped the small container of water he was carrying and moved to help. Their hands met as they lifted it together, lingering just a fraction too long. The brush of her fingers sent an unexpected thrill through him, and he couldn't hide the way his chest tightened. "Marco, careful," she said, her tone teasing, though her cheeks were flushed. "I don't want you straining yourself too early." "I can handle it," he replied, smiling despite the heat and sweat. "Besides, you're not exactly light either." She laughed, the sound echoing through the trees, and for a moment the island felt less like isolation and more like an adventure shared. Their laughter faded into a companionable silence as they worked, the simple acts of carrying, arranging, and preparing sustenance forging an unspoken intimacy between them. By midday, the sun was high, and they returned to their lean-to to rest and eat. Olivia sat beside him, leaning slightly against his shoulder, the heat of her body radiating through the thin fabric of their clothing. Marco's heart raced at the closeness, but he forced himself to focus on the practicalities. Water, food, shelter. "You know," Olivia began, her voice soft, "this island, it strips everything down. No distractions, no pretense, just survival. And somehow, it's terrifying and freeing at the same time." Marco nodded. "It's like the world outside never existed. Just us, the island, and whatever comes next." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "And what's next, Marco?" He swallowed, the heat rising to his face. I don't know. But I know that right now. I want to be here. With you. And not just for survival." Olivia's lips parted slightly, her gaze dropping to his mouth, then back to his eyes. The tension between them was undeniable now, more than just subtle touches or fleeting glances. It had grown into something raw and urgent, a force neither could ignore. The day passed with the usual tasks, fishing, gathering fruit, and reinforcing the shelter, but every moment was laced with a heightened awareness of each other. Even simple touches, like passing a basket or brushing sand from a shoulder, were electric. Both knew the line between caution and surrender had become dangerously thin. By evening, they had managed to catch a small fish and roast a few coconuts, the fire crackling between them as they ate. Olivia sat closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing his, and Marco found himself unable to resist the magnetic pull. "Marco," she whispered after a long silence, "do you ever think about the world we left behind?" "All the time," he admitted. "But out here it feels distant, unreal, like it belonged to someone else." She nodded, leaning slightly closer, her breath brushing against his cheek. "It's strange, how being stranded changes everything." He didn't answer immediately, only let his hand brush hers again. This time he held it deliberately, intertwining their fingers. Olivia's eyes met his, and the intensity of the moment left them both breathless. "Marco," she murmured, her voice trembling, if we give in, it changes everything." "I know," he replied, his voice low. "But maybe, out here, nothing else matters." The words hung in the air, heavy with desire and the thrill of the forbidden. Olivia's eyes softened, and she leaned closer, the heat of her body pressing against his. Marco's pulse raced as their lips met again, this time with a deeper urgency. The kiss was hungry, desperate, a culmination of days of tension and unspoken longing. Their bodies pressed together, the firelight flickering over their forms, illuminating the vulnerability and desire etched into every movement. They broke apart only briefly, foreheads resting together, breaths mingling. The world outside the island seemed non-existent. There was only them, the fire, and the electric current running between their bodies. "This is dangerous," Olivia whispered, her hands tracing the line of his arms. "I know," he said, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "But it feels inevitable." They settled near the fire, hands entwined, the intensity of the moment mingling with the exhaustion of the day. Each glance, each touch, deepened the connection, forging a bond that was both thrilling and terrifying. The island had become their world, a place where survival and desire intertwined, where fear and longing were inseparable. As the night wore on, they spoke in hushed tones, sharing memories, regrets, and small confessions. The emotional intimacy grew, layering over the physical attraction, creating a connection neither had anticipated but both were powerless to resist. Marco realized that the island had stripped away more than just the trappings of their previous lives. It had stripped away their defenses, leaving only raw, human connection. And Olivia, for her part, had begun to let down her own walls, revealing vulnerability, desire, and trust in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. When they finally settled into sleep, wrapped in the shared warmth of the lean-to, Marco felt an intense clarity. He had survived the crash, the island, and the fear of the unknown, but the real challenge, he realized, was navigating the dangerous, thrilling bond that had formed between them. Olivia stirred beside him, pressing closer instinctively, and he held her gently, feeling the fragile balance of desire, trust, and survival. In the quiet of the island night, beneath a canopy of stars, they had discovered something powerful, something forbidden yet undeniable, something that would test both their hearts and their restraint in the days to come. And in that fragile, suspended moment, Marco understood that the island had become more than a place of survival. It had become the crucible in which their connection, desire, and trust would be forged, irrevocably, dangerously, and completely. The 8th day on the island began with a storm brewing in the distance. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, the wind picking up and rustling the leaves in urgent whispers. Marco and Olivia sensed the change instantly. The island, which had felt manageable and even beautiful at times, now revealed its harsh, unpredictable side. "Storm coming," Marco said, scanning the sky. "We need to secure the shelter and gather anything that could blow away." Olivia nodded, her expression serious. "Let's work quickly." The urgency brought a focused energy between them. They moved in tandem, lifting heavy branches, reinforcing the lean-to with extra palm fronds, and securing their fire pit with stones. Each glance, each accidental touch, carried the electric tension that had been building over the past days. The storm, wild and untamed, seemed to mirror the growing chaos between them, both external and internal. Once the shelter was reinforced and the supplies secured, they paused, breathing heavily, adrenaline mingling with the charged awareness of their nearness. Olivia's hair was damp with sweat, her cheeks flushed, and her eyes bright with exertion. Marco's chest tightened, his desire mingling dangerously with his concern for their survival. "You're incredible," he said, his voice low. "Handling this like it's nothing." Olivia smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We have to survive. That's the priority. But, thank you." The storm hit later that afternoon, heavy rain lashing the island, thunder rolling across the sky like an angry drum. The lean-to shuddered under the gusts of wind, but their preparations held. They huddled close, sharing warmth and body heat, the rain outside a constant, urgent reminder of the island's peril. "Marco," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest. "I know," he said softly, "but we'll get through this together. I won't let anything happen to you." Her head rested against his shoulder, and for the first time since the crash, Marco allowed himself to truly acknowledge the depth of his feelings. The fear, the adrenaline, the vulnerability, All of it had stripped away pretense, leaving raw truth. He cared for her in a way that went beyond physical attraction. It was emotional, deep, and terrifying. Hours passed, the storm raging, the fire sputtering in the wind. They spoke little, letting the sound of rain and thunder fill the space between them. Their closeness, forced by circumstance, had become intimate in a way that neither could resist. Marco felt Olivia's hand find his, her fingers intertwining with his. He held her tightly, aware of the way her body fit against his, of the warmth and softness that contrasted with the storm outside. As the night deepened, the storm finally began to abate. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the thunder fading into distant rumbles. Marco and Olivia remained close, reluctant to separate even for a moment. The shared danger had intensified their bond, the physical proximity now layered with emotional connection. "Marco," Olivia said softly, lifting her head to meet his gaze, "there's something between us. Something I can't ignore any more." He nodded, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I know. I feel it too. Every day. And it's terrifying." Her lips were just inches from his, the air between them thick with anticipation. Marco's pulse raced as he considered the line they were crossing, the world outside their island life, and the forbidden nature of what they were feeling. But the storm had changed everything. The isolation, the intensity of survival, the vulnerability they shared, it had stripped away the boundaries that had once held them apart. "Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling with desire and fear, if we do this, it could change everything when we get back." "I know," he murmured, his lips brushing hers in a tentative kiss. "But out here, none of that exists. It's just us." The kiss deepened, growing urgent and electric. Their hands explored cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence, the long-suppressed desire and tension finally breaking free. The storm outside seemed distant now, insignificant compared to the storm of emotions and need that raged between them. They pulled back slightly, foreheads resting together, breaths mingling. Olivia's eyes were glistening, a mixture of vulnerability, desire, and a silent question. Marco's hand traced the line of her jaw, over the curve of her neck, savoring the intimacy without overstepping boundaries. "I've wanted this since the day we crashed," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible over the soft drizzle outside. Me too," she whispered, her hand resting lightly over his heart. "But we need to be careful. We can't let this ruin us when we get back to the real world." Marco nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. But in this moment, the island, the storm, and the survival they shared had created a bubble where only the present mattered. They clung to each other, finding comfort, warmth, and a fragile sense of safety in the midst of chaos. The night stretched on, the storm finally passing, leaving a damp, quiet island bathed in moonlight. Marco and Olivia remained close, speaking in hushed tones, sharing fears, confessions, and small reassurances. The physical intimacy had begun, but it was intertwined with emotional vulnerability, creating a bond that was more profound than either had anticipated. By dawn, the island was calm again. The sun broke through lingering clouds, casting golden light across the wet sand and glistening leaves. Marco and Olivia emerged from the shelter, tired but alive, their bond strengthened by the shared ordeal. The storm had tested them, not just physically, but emotionally, and they had come through it closer than ever. As they prepared for another day of survival, gathering water and scouting for food, both knew that the island had changed them. The fear, the desire, the forbidden intimacy, it was all a part of their new reality. And somewhere deep down, both Marco and Olivia understood that when rescue came, the challenges of the outside world would pale in comparison to the emotional storm that had begun to brew between them. The island, wild and untamed, had forged a connection that was as dangerous as it was irresistible. And both of them knew, with a mix of fear and exhilaration, that the coming days would test not just their survival skills, but the fragile electric bond that had grown in the heart of isolation. The 9th day began with a quiet calm. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the island glistening under the morning sun. The air was thick with humidity, but the tension between Marco and Olivia had settled into something deeper, a mix of familiarity, trust, and a quietly simmering passion that no longer needed constant sparks to exist. They moved together with an almost effortless rhythm. Marco gathered water from the spring while Olivia checked the fishing traps. Each glance carried the subtle intimacy that had grown between them, touches that lingered, shared smiles, small gestures of care. For the first time, survival no longer felt purely like a struggle. It was also a shared experience, a kind of closeness neither had anticipated but both now cherished. While walking along the beach, Marco spotted something in the distance. A flash of bright white against the horizon. "Olivia, look!" he shouted, excitement breaking through his calm exterior. Her eyes widened. "Is that a plane?" It was. A small rescue aircraft, likely searching for survivors of the crash, skimmed the horizon before coming in lower. Adrenaline surged through them, mingled now with hope and disbelief. They waved frantically, their shouts carried by the wind. The plane's pilot spotted them, circling once before landing on a small, clear stretch of beach near the tree line. As they approached the aircraft, Marco felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Rescue meant safety, sure, but it also meant the outside world, the office, responsibilities, and the impossible reality of what had begun between them. Olivia walked beside him, her hand brushing his occasionally. Neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. The connection they had forged on the island was stronger than any conversation could convey. Once they were aboard the plane, the pilot congratulated them on surviving and promised they would be returned to civilization soon. The roar of the engine, the wind whipping past, felt surreal to both of them. For days, they had only known each other and the island. Now, the world was rushing back in. Marco turned to Olivia, heart hammering. "Are you okay?" She nodded, eyes shining. "I think so. More than okay, actually. I feel like I've been living for the first time in years." He smiled, a mixture of relief and something deeper. "Me too. This experience, it changed everything. About life, about us." Olivia's gaze softened, and she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Even though it's complicated?" "Yes," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. "Especially because it's complicated. We can't ignore what we feel." As the plane ascended, the island shrinking beneath them, the gravity of reality began to settle in. But instead of fear or regret, Marco and Olivia felt a strange clarity. The island had stripped away pretense, exposed raw emotions, and forced them into an intimacy that neither office politics nor societal expectations could diminish. They had survived together, and now they would face the world together, on their own terms. Hours later, they were back in the city, the plane touching down near a rescue center. The familiar sounds, the rush of people, and the noise of civilization were almost overwhelming after days of isolation. Marco and Olivia emerged, dazed but alive, clutching each other's hands. They were quickly taken for medical checkups and debriefings, and the officers were astounded at their condition. Physically battered, emotionally exhausted, yet remarkably composed. Marco stayed close to Olivia, supporting her whenever she stumbled from fatigue or the strange mixture of relief and adrenaline. Later, when the initial chaos had settled, they found themselves alone in a quiet corridor. Olivia turned to him, eyes searching, vulnerable and honest. "Marco, the world hasn't stopped. I don't know what comes next." He pulled her close, the familiarity of her scent, her warmth, and her presence grounding him. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "Together. We survived an island. We can survive anything." Her lips brushed his cheek, a soft, lingering touch. "I want that. More than anything." They shared a small, secret smile, an acknowledgment of everything that had happened, of the forbidden desires they had explored, and of the deeper emotional connection that had grown between them. This was no longer just survival or fleeting attraction. It was trust, desire, and something that both knew could endure beyond the isolation of the island. In the following days, as they returned to their routines, Marco to his internship, Olivia to her demanding schedule, they discovered a new equilibrium. Their bond, forged in extreme circumstances, carried over into everyday life. They found stolen moments, a hand held under the table at a meeting, a shared coffee in quiet corners of the office, or simply the comfort of knowing the other was present. The age difference, the workplace hierarchy, and the expectations of society were no longer obstacles. They were details, secondary to the bond that had been forged under fire, rain, and sun on a deserted island. Both knew that navigating the real world would be challenging, but the island had shown them that connection, desire, and trust could survive anything. One evening, long after the world had returned to its usual pace, Marco and Olivia met in a quiet park. The city lights flickered around them, but the space between them felt intimate, a private echo of the island they had left behind. "Do you ever think about it?" Olivia asked softly, her hand brushing his. "All the time," he replied. "And I wouldn't change a moment of it. Not the fear, not the survival, not even the chaos. It brought me to you." Her smile was radiant, her eyes reflecting both mischief and something tender. "And me to you. I guess some things are worth surviving for." They leaned close, and this time the kiss was unburdened by isolation or fear. It was a choice, deliberate and fully acknowledged, a promise of something enduring beyond the island, beyond the crash, beyond every complication life could throw at them. As they held each other under the soft glow of the city lights, both Marco and Olivia understood that their story was far from over. The island had been a crucible, testing their limits, igniting desire, and revealing truth. Now the world awaited, but they would face it together, stronger, bonded, and unafraid. The sun had set long ago, but in the hearts of a 23-year-old intern and his 44-year-old boss's wife, the warmth, trust, and love that had grown on a deserted island burned brighter than ever. They had survived the impossible, and now they were ready to live the possible. Side by side, hearts entwined, ready to face whatever came next.